All right, so good afternoon. We have a special event today happening at the Tween with Allen Cohen and Noshji also here from Beloved Archives, and Allen is from Washington, DC. And I know, hi Srinidhi, we have kids slowly coming in, but we do want to get started so we can maximize our time and ask any questions that we have for Allen and Noshji. So if we can get started with the prayers, that will be great. I'll share my screen. And Soham, if you want to start us off with the Parvardigar prayer.
Okay.
Go ahead.
O Parvardigar, the preserver and protector of all, you are without beginning and without end, non-dual, beyond comparison, and none can measure you. You are without color, without expression, without form, and without attributes. You are unlimited and unfathomable, beyond imagination and conception, eternal and imperishable. You are indivisible and none can see you but with eyes divine. You always were, you always are, and you always will be. You are in everywhere, you are in everything, and you are also beyond everywhere and beyond everything. You are in the firmament and in the depths. You are manifest and unmanifest, on all planes and beyond all planes. You are in the three worlds and also beyond the three worlds. You are imperceptible, independent. You are the creator, the Lord of lords, the knower of all minds and hearts. You are omnipotent, omnipresent, and knowledge infinite, power infinite, and bliss infinite. You are the ocean of knowledge, all-knowing, infinitely knowing, the knower of the past, the present, and the future. You are knowledge itself. You are all merciful and eternally benevolent. You are the souls of souls, one with infinite attributes. You are the trinity of truth, knowledge, and bliss. You are the source of truth, the ocean of love. You are the ancient one, the highest of the high. You are Prabhu and Parmeshwar. You are the beyond God and the beyond God also. You are Par Brahma, Allah Ilahi, Yazdan, Ahura Mazda, and God the Beloved. You are named Isa, the only one worthy of worship.
Thank you, Soham. I see we've had a few others join. Who would like to read the repentance prayer? Shireen Meher, would you like? Oh, Shireen, do you want to read the repentance?
We repent, O God, most merciful for all our sins, for every thought that was false, unjust, or unclean, for every word spoken that ought not to have been spoken, for every deed done that ought not to have been done. We repent for every deed and word and thought inspired by selfishness, and for every deed and word and thought inspired by hatred. We repent most especially for every lustful thought and for every lustful action, for every lie and for all hypocrisy, for every promise given but not fulfilled, and for all slander and backbiting. Most especially also we repent for every action that has brought ruin to others, for every word and deed that has given others pain, and for every wish that pain should befall others. In your unbounded mercy, we ask you to forgive us, O God, for all these sins committed by us, and forgive us for our constant failures to think and speak and act according to your will.
Thank you, Srinidhi. Meher, would you like to read the Beloved God prayer?
Yeah, sure. Beloved God, help us all to love you more and more, and more and more, and still yet more, till we become worthy of union with you. And help us all to fast the Baba Zaman till the very end.
Thank you. All right, so I think we have everyone here pretty much. So guys, it's so nice to see everyone here again. Happy Sunday. We have a special going on today with our guest Allen Cohen, and Nosh also has joined us. So yay, with Tony as well in the background. I would like to get us started with quick introductions from all of you. Soham and Sahana have already given their introductions. So Srinidhi, if you can, and your sister can give your introduction, that would be great. So Allen knows who you guys are, and so does Noshji.
Hi, I'm Srinidhi. We live in Colorado. I'm in 7th grade. I turned 13 2 months ago.
And who's that one next to you?
is Shrenika, and I'm in first grade, and I am 7.
Awesome. Thank you both. Shireen and Meher.
I'm Shireen, and we live in Connecticut. I'm 15 years old, and
I'm 11 years old. I'm Meher, and I'm in 6th grade.
Awesome. I think that's pretty much everyone in terms of the tweens. Below over there, we have Jayashree, who's my mother-in-law. So it's, and she's dialing in from India.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. So I think we have everyone here. Shailaja and Jasimha, like she is our co-host and the parents of Shireen and Meher. I don't see the video on. Shailaja, do you want to say a quick hello? Okay, no worries. All right, so let's get started. I would love to get us started with, oh, there she is. I would love to get us started with, Allen over here. And do you guys know anything about Allen before we introduce him? Do any of you kids know? No?
Wasn't he like, I read about him once.
Ooh, all right, tell us.
Didn't you didn't Meher Baba like you knew what was his name? Richard Alfred Ramdas. Yeah, and then he met Neem Karoli Baba. And then Baba told you what there's this drug and it like gives hallucinations or something. And yeah.
Yeah, pretty good.
That's very good. That's very good.
Awesome, Srinidhi. All right, Allen, if you want to tell us, your story, and then we'll get started.
Okay. Well, Jai Baba, everyone, and it's a delight to be here with this very famous group. The New Humanity is here, and we're counting on all you younger people. It's especially delightful to have Nash here. He can answer any question about Meher Baba that you have that may come up in our discussion. I'm so relieved. And Tony, who's a man of the world and keeps his finger in international political affairs, if you're still doing that, Tony. So we've got wonderful resources here. And I want this to be really informal. The other thing I want you to know is, from my experience, I know that talking to young people, I'm not going to talk any differently to you than I would to an adult, because you know more than most adults, at least back when I was a young. And we're going to delve into some very interesting things today. And I have confidence that if any questions come up or experiences that you've had, please either interrupt or we'll leave lots of time, because especially with Nashir, we have all kinds of things that have happened in the Baba world that perhaps would be very, very interesting to everyone. Anyway, my story. So very briefly, I started out as a student, like all of you. Turned out I went to Harvard College, and there, when I was in my second year, I met Richard Alpert. At that time, he was a professor of psychology, and I really liked him, and he became my advisor. I stayed there for 4 years. I found a very good apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that was very inexpensive. So I asked the Harvard people if I could go to graduate school there. They said, no, you shouldn't go to graduate school here. You need to broaden your view. I said, but I have this great That's Ramdas. I have this great apartment. So I stayed there. And it was when I was a first-year graduate student that Richard and his friend Timothy Leary, also a professor at Harvard, were in charge of our class. And our class was about clinical work in the field in psychology. And at the end of the semester, they said, you can either take a 4-hour final exam, or you can experiment with some new substances that we have. This is Tim Leary. And you can write it up as part of your class. So half of us felt, why do a class? We'll do the experiment. And this involved, this point, a drug that was kind of an experimental drug. It was legal at that time, called psilocybin. And psilocybin is the ingredient of what you might have heard of as magic mushrooms. So we had this experience in it. We knew nothing really about, I hadn't heard of Baba yet, or Eastern thought. And so it was a very exciting experience. There's the mushroom, came in the form of a pill at that point. Leary had been in Mexico and had it for breakfast and was very thrilled about his experience. It was like no other experience he had had. And at that time, we thought we had invented something new about consciousness. So after a couple of years, we were experimenting with this drug, also others. One was called mescaline, which comes from the peyote cactus. Another one that's famous is called LSD, lysergic acid. It came from a fungus in Europe at one time, but they made it into a pill and fluid. Very, very powerful. Very powerful. One bottle of LSD would affect all of Newark, say, New Jersey, or Hartford. It is so strong that 200 millionths of a gram is enough to have one have hallucinations. So we didn't know any better. Eventually,
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, Siri, you know, it's your first experience. So Leary had been in Mexico, and so we got a group together, and a bunch of graduate students rented with help from some wealthy people, rented a big 60-room house near Woodstock, New York. And at that point, we did a lot more experiments. And again, everyone thought that we had invented something brand new, until we started reading some things from India. We had some visits from yogis, and they were a little suspicious. Well, still in all, this became very controversial, and soon afterwards it became illegal. So there was a big fuss about it. And in the 60s, there was a time when the culture, the young people were kind of rebelling. It was time of the Vietnam War. People were challenging authority. And Leary came out with a message that people should tune in, turn on, and drop out. He wanted them to just forget ordinary society. He got in a lot of trouble. Well, meanwhile, we were doing these experiments, and in order to do the experiments, one had to have a guide or somebody who was supervising. And to do that, you had to win a certificate to be a psychedelic guru.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
I've got to turn you off completely here.
I'm not sure I understand.
Maya loves to get their finger in things. So anyway, I passed the test. I was high on LSD, and I learned that there was going to be a film the next day up in Woodstock given by Baba lovers. And it was about a holy man. I knew nothing about this holy man, but I didn't want to be alone at the time. And you know who the film was about. It was about Meher Baba. And it was one of his darshans. And we were, quite skeptical. There was a man named Darwin Shaw who gave the talk after the film. He seemed to us that maybe he had taken drugs because he had this spiritual energy. He hadn't, of course, but they had a book table, and on the book were some of Baba's books, particularly one, a little booklet called Sparks. There was Darwin. And in that little book, there were paragraphs where Baba, in a few lines, had explained everything that we had been reading about Indian mysticism and God, etc. So according to the ethos of that time, I stole the book. It was one of my better thefts. Later, when we got home, I asked if there were other people who knew about this Meher Baba. One person happened to have the discourses. He had never read them. It's one of Baba's important books, of course. And so I had to test Meher Baba out by taking a large dose of this hallucinogen, going up on a hill and reading part of the discourses, where I thought that I had reached the sixth plane of higher consciousness. Now, those of you who have been acquainted with God Speaks know that there are several planes of consciousness. This would have been a very high state, but it was total illusion. But I believed it because people who were staying at this house, it was in the middle of summer, they thought I glowed like a god. Turns out I was sunburned. I was working at a school for the, at that time, we called them the mentally disabled children. And they were applauding when I came in because, not because I was an advanced soul, but because they thought I was Paul McCartney, who you might know as a member of the rock group, the Beatles. Anyway, I thought that all the Baba lovers should know how to get this higher consciousness. And so I wrote to the only address I had, which was one of Kitty Davy, a person named Kitty Davy, who at that time was at the Universal Spiritual Center in Myrtle Beach. And I told her how to do this and what dosage to take and what parts of the discourses to read. And she did not understand what I was talking about. There's Kitty. And so she sent the letter to India. She sent the letter to Adi K. Irani. Now, Adi was then the correspondent between the West and Meher Baba. This was in 1964, a long time ago. And Adi read the letter, and he didn't quite understand either, and he didn't know what to do with it. So he interrupted Meher Baba's seclusion. And Adi said, Baba, I don't understand. I'm sorry to interrupt your seclusion, but I don't understand this business. Well, guess who knew how to answer the letter? You're right. It was Meher Baba. And he told me that no, he was very nice about it. No, you are not advanced from this experience. You are not the sixth plane. It's nowhere, it's an illusion. And he said some other things about this, that it would be harmful mentally, physically, and spiritually. And it started to change my mind because I could see, for one thing, that the people they said they were very spiritual, my friends, when they got on this drug, but when they came back, they would be themselves and they would get in fights over who was to do the dishes in the morning. This is not high consciousness, no. So we did all kinds of things. We brought in people who were psychic to take a look at the house and the energy, and they said it was very troublesome. Later we learned, which I'll say and talk about in a minute, that the effects of these drugs not only affect the physical body, but what Mayor Baba calls the subtle body or the astral body between the ordinary body and higher levels of consciousness. I'll get back to that. So eventually, the LSD movement got very strong in the United States. Murshid Adus of Sufism Reoriented at that time wrote a letter to Baba with a New York Times article in it. And basically Baba sent back a letter to myself, Rick Chapman, Robert Dreyfus, and to be intended for all the Baba lovers who wanted to help, to get people to stop, here's Murshid Adus, get people to stop using these drugs for spiritual purposes, that would be extremely damaging. And he was particularly concerned about young people. So she told me to take this very seriously, along with Rick and Robert. But we were not very important people. And Baba said to give talks and to write articles. And I didn't think we could do it. And so Murshid Adus wrote back to me and says, you better do it. It's not your job, Rick and Robert here, not your job to worry about results. You just go ahead. And then magical things happened. Magical things where everybody who we proposed an article for or a radio show or a talk, they all said yes. Yes, we want to hear about LSD and God. And it got so that at one point, somebody wrote to Baba and said this was the particular radio show that they thought we should go on. And Baba wrote back through Adi saying, well, Allen Cohen is in charge of television for this. I said, what? What? It seemed ridiculous. But again, the magic happened. Baba lovers all over the country would call their television stations and ask if they wanted to have myself or Rick primarily. Robert was more working with college groups at that time, whether they'd like to have me interview. And they all said yes. And by the time, after a couple of years, the shows we got on were, particularly the shows where the hosts of the shows really like to criticize. They really like to put people down. And that was our specialty. So Baba would do some very strange things. Once in one show, you have probably not seen it. It was very popular at times, called the Joe Pine Show. He was famous for destroying his guests. He would just kill them verbally. And so Baba wanted the message out, so we didn't care if we got killed, but we were a little nervous. But just before, here's Joe Pine, just before the show went on, it was being taped, a dove flew from out of the ceiling and landed on the panel, white dove just in front of us. There were about 400 people in the audience. It turned out, by the way, this dove had escaped from a previous guest who was an African shaman who used snakes and animals and other birds in their form of worship. We thought that was a good sign. And just as in the middle of the show, they brought on an expert to tell us that LSD was good. It's good for spirituality, not bad. The man stood up. He was very articulate. He was good looking. He spoke very well, but suddenly he said, well, what they say might be correct. Well, maybe it's correct. And his eyes began to glaze and he began to move around on the lectern and he fainted dead away. Fainted. On the air, there was chaos. And the producer ran out and said, this will be an object lesson for millions. Well, we went to the man to try to help him. His wife came up and we said, what's wrong? Does he have seizures or stress or faint, or did he not eat? He said, no, he's fine. He's always been fine. And we woke him up. He was smiling. He felt great. That show became very, very popular. And over 50 million people saw it. We were able to talk about Baba easily after that. And the audience became sympathetic. And of course, we always brought pictures of Baba with us. Later on, it was clear that Baba was not only interested in doing something about the drug thing, but also getting his name out to everybody. Now, this is what's interesting. Mayor Baba usually did not get involved at all with politics. And he didn't get involved with social movements. He didn't get involved with legislatures or policy. But this drug issue, very unusual. He got himself really deeply involved. And he would make things happen that were both very funny and kind of miraculous. I'll tell just one story of it. I was asked to come up to a Baba group at Amherst, Massachusetts. I was lecturing, I was touring. One year after I think I got fired from my job at Berkeley because Pete Townsend of the Who rock group wanted me to come to England to do a tour with him, interviewing on the drug issue. Anyway, I gave about 400 talks or interviews that year. So I was really tired, but they said, we have a nice little group. Pete, they're still very active, the Who, although they don't have too many concerts. And Pete, of course, wrote many songs that had Baba involved. Baba O'Reilly is one of those songs. You probably would have heard the track. Anyway, small group in Amherst, Massachusetts. They only had about 8 or 10 people, and they invited some friends. They just put up a small notice. Anyway, I went up there. It was snowing, and I went to the room, and there was nobody there. And I thought, well, a few Baba lovers will come. We'll just go have coffee, talk about Baba. And the little sign came up saying, "No, we've switched rooms." I thought, well, it can't be a room much smaller than this classroom, but that's great. I walked into this new room. There were 1,500 students in it. It was almost a third of the entire campus. I was shocked. But I brought a film of Baba with me. And I talked about LSD a little bit. I talked about Baba. And I showed this film of Baba. It was Baba at Myrtle Beach. And then I opened it up for questions. And the questions started getting pretty hostile. People would say things like, I think Meher Baba has Parkinson's disease. See how he's shaking his hand like this? And others would say, this whole thing sounds like it's a problem of sexual repression. Oh my God. And they were grumbling because they really didn't know why they had come. And no one ever knew why they had come, and except Baba, of course. And things were getting bad. The audience was turning against me. And then suddenly, I heard this blood-curdling scream from this woman. Ah! And then more screams. And suddenly I went blind and was knocked off the lectern. And I thought, oh my God, they finally shot me. The anti-Baba people have come after me. And then quickly I said, am I still alive or I'm dead? And there were certain ways of telling, like Baba said that after you, between lives, you didn't have the sense of taste or smell, but I did. I tasted banana cream. Banana cream? What was that? Turns out somebody got loose from a mental hospital. He thought I was advocating LSD. Went to the cafeteria, got a banana cream pie, snuck up behind me and smashed me in the face, knocking me over and blinding me. So I had to laugh. And I stood up there and said, my friends in Berkeley will really get a kick out of this. And continued answering the question, dripping pie. This changed the whole audience. The whole atmosphere changed. They wanted me to call the police. I said, no, just get them a counselor. It was chaos for a while. And anyway, they became very friendly. Later, the next day, they wrote very nice articles in the college newspaper about how they were ashamed, but also how it was handled gracefully and was kind of gave the feeling of this man who was the embodiment of kindness and love. Things like that would happen. I could tell story after story, but I did want to spend time today, believe it or not, to talk about Meher Baba and neuroscience. Yes, you're going to get a little lesson on neuroscience today. And I know you'll understand it, even though the adults may not understand it. Meher Baba had said a lot of things about drugs specifically. Rick Chapman just has been compiling an entire book about all the things that Bob had said about drugs. Remember, this was early, before Baba passed away, in the 50s and the early 60s. He was specific about what hashish and marijuana did, what LSD and psilocybin did. He talked about alcohol a bit. He talked about specifically what it did to the body, what it also did to the mind, and how, in fact, even in the future, it would be used as medicine.
Alan, sorry to
yes.
interrupt. I just want to pause here real quick, and it's great hearing your stories. Just open it up to any questions that any of these kids have for you.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyone else? Do you guys have any
It's
questions? Anybody have any questions? Shireen, Soham? And I see we have Sia here. Hi, Sia. Jai Baba. Do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. I have one quick question. So I know you went and did a lot of talks, especially going back to the particular incident that you just spoke about. What kind of questions would you get from the audience? Can you give us an example?
Well, you had all kinds of questions. It really depended on the audience. For example, the radio and TV people would be skeptical about a master who had never spoken for 40 years. They would ask why. Robert Dreyfus, who passed away a few years ago, I was on a radio show in California, and he calls up and asks me, why are there only 5 perfect masters? He says, I heard that Meher Baba said there are 5 perfect masters. And of course, on the radio, it's almost impossible to answer that question. Other people would be interested in, they would ask what religion Baba was, because it was complicated, wasn't it? He was from a Zoroastrian family. He was born in a Jewish hospital. He went to Catholic school, and he had both Hindu and Muslim masters. So a lot of the questions were about that. They'd ask what he said about reincarnation, for example. They would certainly ask on occasion why I would think that he was the avatar. They would ask, certainly they would ask questions about how would he, all the way over in India, know all these details about these new drugs, these new investigational drugs that even the scientists knew very little about. They would ask that. So I don't think there's a question over the years that people haven't asked, but it would really depend on the audience. And sometimes it was the people who didn't ask the questions. So almost every time we gave a talk, there was at least one person who later got in contact with us and got very, very interested in Meher Baba, many becoming Baba lovers. So that was one facet of it. Any other questions? All right.
I'm okay, so we can continue.
You okay?
Anybody else have any questions? Okay.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about neuroscience, and then we can really get into it about drugs. The remarkable thing was that Meher Baba was the greatest neuroscientist. By neuroscience, obviously, we're talking about the science of the brain and the nervous system, particularly the brain, because all these drugs, that's where their action is primarily. He knew about the physical effects. He also knew about the mental effects, which were not known. It was not known that, particularly for young people, these drugs could cause mental illness. There are about 4,000 studies that show, for example, the active ingredient in marijuana is very, very hard on the physical brain and also breaks down barriers to mental disorders that would not otherwise have happened. He distinguished between real spirituality and fake spirituality. He said, and I think tellingly, that every person who takes drugs, even those who are addicted, will admit to, and that is that they are temporary. That even if they enjoy the experience, it goes away. And when it goes away, the average experience is less satisfying. So they're really in a difficult time. They could have very bad experiences, they could overdose, but they could have good experiences, and that is just as much a problem because that will potentially lead to addiction. I did want to particularly talk about something that you know about already, but not many people know about. That Baba was very clear regarding, and that has to do with marijuana. Now, you all know, we're going to try to show a video to see if it works. Shilpa will help us. That it's a plant with a lot of chemicals in it. And people are very, very confused about it. In New Jersey, for example, it's about to be legalized for adults. And it has a particular effects that are very, what we would call insidious. And people don't understand it. They don't understand what it does in the brain. Well, let's get a taste of that. But let's see if we can see the cannabis video, okay?
You've probably heard that marijuana isn't good for kids, but what does that actually mean?
To answer that question, let's take a closer look at the endocannabinoid system. to see exactly what it does, what marijuana does to it, and what that does to you.
Spread throughout the brain, the endocannabinoid system is a biological system made up of chemical messengers called endocannabinoids, cellular receptors that communicate with endocannabinoids, and enzymes that break down endocannabinoids after they've delivered their messages.
As endocannabinoids communicate with receptors throughout your body, they create balance and help regulate many body and brain functions, such as helping with memory, coping with stress, pain, and anxiety, and keeping hunger, body temperature, motor coordination, and alertness in balance.
Now let's see what happens when marijuana is introduced into this balancing system. Made from a plant called cannabis, marijuana can be smoked, vaporized, or ingested through food or drink.
Marijuana contains a chemical called tetrahydrocannabinol, also known as THC. Since THC's chemical structure is similar to naturally occurring endocannabinoids, the body allows THC to attach to endocannabinoid receptors in the brain.
When THC enters the body, it overwhelms the endocannabinoid system, attaching to cannabinoid receptors and throwing the body and brain off balance, preventing endocannabinoids in your brain from doing their jobs. Endocannabinoids work like a well-conducted and highly synchronized orchestra, with each one playing at a particular time and place in harmony. When THC is introduced, the precise coordination is lost and thrown off. The endocannabinoids can no longer do their special job. This means your brain will have a harder time regulating all of those functions like memory, coping with stress and anxiety, and motor coordination. Plus, when using marijuana, some people may experience fear, anxiety, paranoia, or memory loss.
Laws allowing medical and recreational use of marijuana for adults are becoming more common in some states, though not in others. But as a young person with a still developing brain, marijuana can have a stronger, more harmful effect on you than adults.
In fact, research has shown that young people who chronically use marijuana, especially highly potent marijuana, increase their risk of cognitive and memory damage, serious mental illnesses like depression and psychosis, and addiction to alcohol or other drugs in adulthood.
Learning the facts can help you make healthy decisions. So say yes to a healthy lifestyle and no to underage marijuana use.
To learn more, visit asklistenlearn.org.
So now, you know more than 99% of all the adults in the United States about the effects of cannabis. So the important thing here to understand when people say, well, it's safe, you know, it's not addictive, they really don't know what they're talking about, particularly because the adults when they were younger, they were smoking marijuana at a very, very low dosage of this powerful chemical THC that really, if you fix the dosage, is as strong as psilocybin or mescaline or LSD. Meher Baba, the neuroscientist, knew this. We didn't know this back then. Everybody thought, nah, he's making too much of a big deal about it. But it's very confusing because there are other chemicals in that plant that can be used medically. You've perhaps heard of one of the chemicals called CBD. CBD doesn't make you high and seems to have some very useful medical options. But it's very confusing today because the people who are making the laws about recreational use, not medical use, don't know the trouble they're getting into. And the black market folks are producing cannabis that can be vaped, that can be eaten. You know, you get marijuana candy bars, that can be drunk. Some people are coming out with like beer that has THC in it, or obviously smoked. So the black marketers are increasing the concentration of this powerful chemical, THC, which has all of the factors that Meher Baba pointed out back when we knew nothing about the chemistry of it. The other thing that is important to understand, particularly about these, what we used to call psychedelic drugs, psychedelic meaning mind manifesting, meaning whatever is in your mind at the time you take it, it gets blown out of proportion. If you're in a bad mood, it can make a terrible experience. One of the things is that the THC from marijuana is soluble, that is, dissolves in fat. And the fat cells in the body attract and absorb the THC. Your brain is primarily fat, made up of fat cells. So people who seem to be smoking, say they smoke marijuana or they vape it, not every day, they think they're doing fine, but actually it's building up in their system and they don't know it. They begin to lose their memory. Their grades go down. They're not motivated. Any of their activities, for example, either in athletics or music or art, start to disintegrate slowly. And it's one of the reasons it's so dangerous, because it's not, the effects are not so fast over time that people know. So you'll find marijuana users, and they will absolutely deny that there's any bad effects on them. One man called me up on the radio and said, "You are totally wrong about this, Dr. Cohen. You're totally wrong. Marijuana is not addictive. And I know for sure because I've smoked every day for the last 20 years.
Hey, Alan, we have a question from one of the kids.
Oh, good. Fire away.
Go ahead, Sana.
So since they're like coming out with like what do you say, like bars, like, I have like two questions. Are they coming out with like chocolate bars as well, or like candies and like?
Yes. They're coming out with
and then
gummy bears. Yeah, go ahead.
so like, could someone like trick you thinking that's a real candy bar?
Yes, they could. There have been a lot of kids who've had to go to emergency rooms, mostly because they found them around the house. Now, supposedly there's supposed to be big labels on the candy bars that will tell you. And so you can usually tell if they're real. And not too many people wish to trick kids into doing this, because they're going to get in terrible trouble. B, the kids are going to know that they're responsible for it. And it's not like the kids are going to be very wealthy and buy candy bars for the rest of their life that have this in it. But I'm glad you brought that up, because one has to be careful now, particularly in states where it's legalized, where all kinds of these foods, they even have it in spaghetti, soft drinks. And again, hopefully it's labeled so that you won't be fooled, but this is going to be an increasing problem. That was a very, very good question.
Does anybody
I
else
also
have
have a
any
question.
questions? Go ahead, Soha.
So I know now that they're making like rolls, like kind of like Icy Hot, where they make like rolls of it and then you can like put it on aching muscles. But is it different because it's CBD?
Yes, it is different because it's CBD.
Okay.
So the substance that gets you high wouldn't have any effect on muscles or anything like that.
Because that's just for muscle relaxation.
That's just for muscle. And the CBD is relatively easy to obtain from a doctor who specializes in these kinds of things, whereas there's no medical use for THC except for very experimental stuff going on now. But thank you for the question. That was very,
Does anybody else have any questions?
I I have a question. So the drug, like, it was like LSD.
LSD, yes,
Is
right.
it like illegal now?
LSD is illegal now. Yes,
Oh,
that's not being. I don't know of any state where it's legal. There are psychiatrists who are experimenting with it to see if it might be helpful in treating alcoholism, for example, or depression. But that's very early. Although Baba said that could be a legitimate use. Now,
I have a quick question, Alan, if that's okay. So we do have, like hemp seeds, right? Or a hemp in lotions and oil, which
yes,
has nutritious benefits.
yes.
So this is where I guess, for, those of us who are here, how is that any different from like the CBD oil? And, should we be consuming hemp or not?
Well, hemp is a part of that same plant species,
right.
But it has little or no THC in it. So it'd be almost impossible to get high from hemp. And there are even rules now in agricultural rules to make sure that it does not exceed a very, very small percentage. So I think hemp's kind of in the same category as sunflowers or sesame seeds. That's not to be, it's not going to be a problem.
Okay, good to know, because I mean, it can get confusing, right? With so
it's
many.
Very confusing, very confusing, extremely confusing. But Mayor Baba knew the difference. The Indians in, I don't know if still in current time, sometimes on the farms, the Indian women would give opium to the children as babysitting techniques, which, it happened to work as a sleep aid in that case. So in many of the Eastern countries, in Iran, India, Pakistan, there have been cultural traditions where particularly the narcotics, stuff made from the opium poppies have been used. But really, very few people have ever argued that opium or heroin or the new very dangerous drug fentanyl had anything to do with spirituality. So when some of our Baba lover colleagues say, well, Baba told you to get people to stop using drugs, you didn't do very well in the last 50 years. And we said, well, maybe not in general, but there's very few people now who would use it for spiritual purposes. Baba really put an end to that. There's a few Peruvians, etc., but now it's really a question more of health and of weakening mental health in particular, and encouraging addiction. All of you've read about the opioid overdoses that have killed about 80,000 people in the United States every day. So, and you know what addiction is. Addiction is where the brain has to compensate for these drugs that have, for example, the narcotics. And the brain has to get used to it. Once the brain gets used to it, it demands it. So the poor heroin addict really gets terribly ill if they don't have it. So ill that they'll do anything to get high again. Because to get high for them is just to get back to normal. So they're physically addicted.
Right. I think we have one more question, Alan. I'm so sorry.
Oh, good.
I forget that. Oh yeah, fentanyl. Isn't that also an opioid?
Yes, fentanyl is an opioid. Fentanyl has been used medically as a painkiller during surgery. It is also very, very, very powerful. Very close to being as powerful as LSD. So what the black market is now doing is they're putting fentanyl in to pretend for people to think it's heroin. And they can overdose very, very easily, almost just by sniffing a few powders of it. So that's become a real problem. The earlier overdoses on opioids were more the prescription pills, and people were just getting more and more addicted, and they were getting more and more used to higher and higher doses, and they got more and more trouble.
And I heard stories. I heard a story of, I think, a police officer who just touched it, and he had to get put on medications to actually like not get addicted to it.
Yeah, it's tough. You have to put gloves on to deal with when people are doing raids or things like that. It's mostly coming from China now and coming up through Mexico. So
I think we have also one more question.
I think it's even coming from Africa and India, right? I've seen I saw it on CNN.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, sure. Anybody who's interested in imports, they do it through the internet usually, or smuggling. Anyway, one can see why Baba was so interested. Go ahead, another question.
I think we have two participants who raised hands. I'm just going to ask, guys, if you have any questions, just find a good spot and then ask Alan. This way, we can get the conversation going. All right, go ahead, Shireen Meher.
All right, so why are governments making drugs legal?
Good question. For a number of reasons. For one reason is they don't know what to do about it. And they're having trouble simply arresting people who are using, because they can put them in jail and they get out of jail and they go back to drugs. Well, that's a problem. And people were not turning themselves into doctors and saying, please help me, I'm addicted, because they were afraid that in itself would be a criminal activity. So for certain of the drugs that really are kind of out of control, people realistically want to, or thought it would be a good idea to decriminalize use. And that is what I think is what Baba would probably go along with. You don't put people in jail because they're addicted, but you make them go to treatment. Okay? So you're not a criminal, but still the government has the authority to force you to seek help, because 95% of these people don't want to do that. They don't want to go cold turkey. They don't want to stop. They've built their lives around it. Some of them have become professional thieves and they don't know what else to do. They don't have support groups. So that was one reason. Then there was a reason that was a little not as brilliant, saying, well, they're using it, let's tax them. Let's regulate it like tobacco or alcohol, and we'll get the tax money from it. Now, here the mistake they made was they confused decriminalization with legalization. This is proving disastrous, because there's no mechanism in those states that have these rules there's no leverage to get people to get help or to get treatment. If it's legal and you're over 21, there's no way, unless they do a crime while they're intoxicated. And who wants to wait for them to, either jump out of a 13-story window or shoot somebody in order to get them to stop using drugs? So that's gonna make a much bigger problem. Theoretically, if you're under 21 and it's illegal for somebody to give you any of these drugs or to sell it to you, and there's still not a lot of medical support for teenagers to get assistance. And they know they're going to get in trouble with their parents for sure. They're hanging out with people who ultimately are getting their supplies illegally. So there was some reasonable thinking behind decriminalizing, but they leaped into making recreational, for example, marijuana legal, in order both to collect taxes, but forgetting and not understanding what the physical and mental and addictive problems were going to be. And we're starting to see a rise, for example, in kids getting in trouble, emergency rooms. It's going to become obvious in about 2 years that it was really a mistake to legalize this. And they're going to have to crack down. It's kind of like the culture had to realize that smoking tobacco was not healthy, and made a real effect to cut down on smoking. The same is going to happen with marijuana and some of these other drugs.
I think we have another question, Alan.
Great.
My question is, why would the government come up with something like that, and why would people want to use it?
Okay, why would well, we just talked a little bit about reasons why the government would do this. Pretty much because they didn't know what they were doing. They were ignorant. They just didn't know the facts. If they listened to Mayor Baba, they would not have done it. Now,
so we're all smarter then, right?
Yes. Now you ask, why would people do it? They do it out of curiosity. They do it because there was pressure from their friends to do it. They would do it if they were feeling bad and they felt they could feel better. So and the people who started it, get used to it and would become dependent on it, like smokers. The thing in tobacco smoke that really gets you hooked is a chemical. It's called nicotine. And if you took the nicotine out of tobacco, not very many people would continue smoking. So it hits on kind of the same elements of why people might like to drink alcohol, why they might, in some sense, want to skydive out of a plane, why they might want to take risks. So, it's natural for teenagers to be curious and to be a little bit rebellious, and also to do things that their adults don't want them to do. That's fairly natural. And Mayor Baba often told people, don't feel guilty about what you have done in the past. Just don't make the same mistake again. A lot of us were involved in using drugs in the old days, and Baba didn't shame us or anything like that. He just told us what was going to be healthy for us and what he wanted us to be able to do, and wanted us to be able to progress spiritually as quickly as possible. And he knew that the drugs were going to be a real block to that. So we don't want to look at this as just good and bad, because in a certain sense there is no real thing as good and bad. It's all God. But Baba is trying to be helpful, trying to have you be as healthy and productive and effective in the new humanity as possible. For example, if you become an addict or a marijuana user, you're not going to be as effective at school, in your later careers, as parents. And right now, your job is going to be to transform the entire society. It's going to be to help Baba make his principles actualized in real life. I mean, those of you who are following the news, etc., it's a pretty chaotic time. People are pretty crazy now. You've got the epidemics, you've got potential war, you've got all of this. Well, all of this, Baba is shaking up everything so that there's going to be room for kind of people are going to realize that they've got to get back to real spirituality in order to change things.
So Alan, I have a question for you, and as well as Nashti, because I know Nashti, you had also, as I guess as a journalist, you had some interesting stories, right, where you had to kind of get some information. So what were your experiences like? Were they similar to Alan? Oh, you're on mute, Nashti.
Hi. I never ingested any drugs ever in my life, so I won't be able to narrate any experiences. However, I did have a lot of interaction with Allen Cohen. I interviewed him on radio in Bombay when I was a correspondent with All India Radio. And he contributed a great deal when I was putting together a book called The Glass Pearl, in which we narrated the untold LSD story. And I may have mentioned a little bit about my meeting with Richard Alpert. I used to work for the Times of India, and one day I was doing a late evening session and going back home, and I saw this a very large crowd of people with a man in yellow robes sitting on the stage, but in front of him was an American giving a very, very lucid talk. It turned out to be Richard Alpert. He was known as Ramdas, and he was introducing Swami Muktananda. So I went and checked with them, with his people sitting there, and I said, do you think that there'll be another session tomorrow of Swami Muktananda's giving darshan? And he said, yes, we'll have another session tomorrow. So I brought copies of the Glow with me, and I handed them over to Ramdas, and then who in turn forwarded them to Swami Muktananda. They were meant for Muktananda, but you had to give them to Ramdas. That's a much younger Muktananda.
Okay.
And the second time I met Richard Alpert was at Rutgers University. He had come to give a talk. And I went up to him and I said, introduced myself. And he said, you are the one who wrote the book, The Glass Pearl? And I said, yes. He said, but you never wrote the complete story. I said, that's because I didn't have all the correspondence. I said, would you be so kind enough to share that with me? And he said, well, I've burnt all my correspondence. He decided to make a bonfire of his entire drug past. So that was my meeting with Allen Cohen.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was looking for, Nashi, because I know as a journalist, you had a lot of interaction to put the material together for your book, right?
But I'll now ask a question of Allen. Allen, I've met a number of Baba lovers who have been on drug trips and so forth. And a common answer has been, we've never been 100% after our drug experience. and you've had drug trips. Would you say the same?
Well, I don't know if I was 100% before. I may never have seen 100% now. But I think there are a lot of people who have lingering effects. From a physical point of view, the brain heals pretty well. For some people who really did a lot of these drugs, they punched holes in the membrane between the physical and the astral body. So they have to be very, very careful about who they're around and what situations they're around, because they can pick up a lot of negativity that we're blocked from the lower realms, ghosts and spirits and stuff like that. And then some have, some are a little more anxious than they ordinarily would, because one of the things that the stronger drugs do is they put the normal person out of control. And for some people, that fear of being out of control persists, but it also works the other way. They're so afraid of being out of control that they become very rigid. But usually I have the 3, 3, and 3 rule. For most people, if you stop drugs, you'll know the difference in 3 weeks. You'll know a big difference in 3 months, and you'll probably be back okay in 3 years, whatever you did. And that's a trick I do with people who say, I'm not addicted, especially with marijuana. As you know, you're not dependent on it? No, I'm not dependent on it. I said, all right, I'll make you a bet. Let's see if you can stop smoking for 3 weeks. And if you can, I will personally and publicly apologize to you for being wrong. And they say, for 3 weeks? They say, well, I'm not sure about that. They never lasted. They never lasted. But it was a good object lesson to them that they really couldn't. And they have all kinds of excuses. Well, I really feel, yeah, I'm going to a concert. I want to get high. No, but they come back and they said one person was studying for admission to law school for smoking marijuana. He couldn't complete the study course for an entire year. And he never put 2 and 2 together. I said, you ever think that smoking pot every night might have some impact on your ability to study? He said, I never thought of that. So he did stop. And the other thing is, people who are protected really very much are the people who have good family situations, who have spiritual feelings, who have activities or hobbies that they really love, and they have objectives that are important to them. Because no matter what, they will see that the drugs get in their way. In the old days, people would say, well, I can do better. I can do better music on drugs. I can perform better athletically, play music better. And that's what Pete Townsend, really, he understood. That's what he understood. His band got worse. They were not as musically good when they were using drugs, but they thought they were. But when they heard the recordings of their rehearsals, they got very upset. He said, that was bad. So, you're pretty much protected if you're engaged in things, if you believe in yourself and you have things you want to do. So
And
It's
one more
good to have
question.
hobbies.
I wanted to ask one more question of you. Essentially, Baba made you a drug evangelist, and you
yes,
did tremendous amount of work with Rick and Robert.
yes.
Now, people like Michael Pollan are writing books advocating the use of LSD and other drugs.
Hmm.
Do you feel that today you, as a drug evangelist, can take the lead in continuing to propagate Meher Baba's message of no drugs, harmful physically, mentally, and spiritually as we go forward? Do you feel a sense of responsibility to do that? And if so, are you planning to do that? Are you doing it? Is there any way we can participate in that? Your answer.
I could say the same for you, Nash. You're one of our evangelists. One does what one can do. There are a couple of things that I think are important. One, several Baba lover children have died of overdoses. You have to know that. And several are now addicted and in treatment. So I think one of my highest priorities is to make sure that the Meher Baba community, and particularly parents, are educated enough about this so their kids don't get in trouble. That's a small thing, but that's a smaller audience, but I think a very, very high priority. Now, since Pollan and the other LSD advocates are not really treading on spiritual ground, in a certain way, and they're talking about things like microdosing, that is taking very, very small amounts of LSD. These are not the big threats to American health. They're just playing around. Right now, I've been working mostly on the marijuana issue. And for example, the video that you saw, I've been working with those people to help develop it and evaluate it. And the irony is that video was produced by a foundation that's funded by distilled spirits manufacturers, owners of wineries and liquors, etc., because they don't want their alcohol mixed at all with these other drugs. So we do what we can do. Certainly, I collect data, but the science is doing our job for us. On the one hand, the science is really beginning to come in, and yeah, I work with a law enforcement organization in New Jersey, as a matter of fact, that sends their police officers out to schools to do a very good 10-week curriculum about substances and substance abuse. Now, there are many people now that not necessarily Baba lovers that share this concern. So there's a whole group of public health people who are beginning to understand what's going on. So it is a communication problem, and we help where we can, and we try to show people where they can get information, where they can be references, what in fact they're up against, and to the extent that we can influence legislation. For example, this particular President Biden is against legalization, even though a lot of politicians are favorable towards it. So, we do what we can do. But it's the battle is now, on the one hand, a public health battle, the important thing about Baba as a neuroscientist is that for anybody who thought he was just making this up, not making it up, but oh, well, he says not to sin, so not to do bad things, da, 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 da. But it was not a big deal. Well, it was a big deal. And the important thing for us when we give this message in any way we can, from a science point of view, from an education point of view, we know that he knew exactly what was going on. So that, for example, I was able to consult with people about what kinds of psychedelic research should or should not be done with certain kinds of mental illness problems based on what Baba said. For example, that he said LSD could be used for depression, severe depression, instead of like electric shock therapy. He didn't mention that just for mentioning it, but if you use it for anxiety, it's very dangerous because it could multiply the anxiety. Whereas with depression, it could break through and at least give people a small look at at another way of looking at life. So we got to, Nosha, I know you're continuing your cosmic international work and have always supported through Glass Pearl and the Glow. We have a real record, international record, and people understand that the Glow has its own authority. And it's been very, very helpful reaching in places that ordinarily would not get good drug education. So we're helping the public health people as much as we can. I think especially our responsibility is, I don't want to see another Baba lover die of drugs. I don't want to see them in mental hospitals. I don't want to see the kids addicted. Mayor Baba lovers who are parents are just often as ignorant of what's going on. These kids who are brought up in, you guys, the tweeners, brought up in the best of circumstances, know a lot. At 12, 13, 14 years old, they know a lot about what's going on. They can tell you who in the middle school is using drugs. And in high school, they'll be able to tell you who the gangs are who are behind them. So we know that and parents are getting almost no education at all in this, whereas the kids really are going to be exposed to it. In New Jersey, for example, they have to have a certain number of courses from K through 12, and some of you in the public schools have had a little taste of this. But what Baba has done is laid the foundation for what's going to be found and what we can do. And to the extent that if anybody pops up their head with the idea that getting high is going to lead to God, Nosh, I'm on it. I'm going after them.
That's awesome. We have one more question and we have about 6 minutes left. So Tony, and then we can conclude because we do have Effort and Grace at 5:30.
Yeah, that was such a wonderful conclusion. I'm not sure I really want to say what I had in mind. I'll just briefly to share. I was here the last 2 weeks telling my story, and I briefly touched on the role that LSD played in that. I was on a very intense quest that began at the moment that Baba dropped his body, although I had not heard of him. And halfway through, and I knew I would need insight and awareness to fulfill this quest. And halfway through, I came across this you're an anti-drug evangelist, but I came across one of the LSD evangelists of the day. And telling me, and Tommy was playing on a little turntable.
Really?
And he was, yeah. And I had just actually seen Baba's picture without knowing it as I walked up that corner, someone wearing a button. But he talked about how LSD would give you, strengthen your insight and awareness. So I said, okay, I'm willing to take any risk for that quest. And it didn't really help, but I enjoyed it. I didn't have even the one bad experience. Friends came and rallied, and I felt the love, and it was great. But on the 3rd of March it's a Tuesday of 1970, a year later, I heard of Baba. I saw his picture. Immediately, I had his darshan, really. I recognized him. I knew who he was. And it was like instantaneous. And I knew he had put me on that quest. And by Friday or Saturday, someone had set me up to make some music and then have some LSD with a mutual friend.
Yeah.
And I took the pill, took the tab, whatever it was, and it started to come on. The trip took a little while to begin. That's how it worked. And for the first time ever, what I felt, you said LSD expands whatever you're feeling. What I felt was intensely bored. And the one clear inner thought was, I don't need this anymore. I was using it for my quest. I found Baba. I don't, and I managed to get something that would put me to sleep for 12 hours so I wouldn't have to have the experience. Never touched it again. And a week or so later, when somebody told me Baba had said similar things about pot, well, I didn't think there was anything wrong with pot, but if Baba said it, that was enough for me. So I stopped. The only other thing was about the effects. I did skip school. I was at Queens College for the better part of 2 years. Skipped classes. I enjoyed hanging out on campus, and I had skipped a year when I was younger. But then I was around some Baba folks who were encouraging me to get back to school and be responsible. And I was reluctant. And I told a friend, I think all the drugs I took have messed up my mind a little bit. And I was just trying to get out of the conversation. But the next Wednesday was a discourse meeting by Dr. Harry Kenmore. And at the end, he opened up to questions. And my friend, clearly, it felt like a setup. He said, Doctor, what if someone's been taking LSD and different drugs and now feels that their mind is really not working properly and can't function to go back to school or meet their responsibilities? And Kenmore said, well, such an individual has no alternative but to surrender himself lock, stock, and barrel to Meher Baba. And Kenmore knew what Chuck my friend was up to, but it was a wonderful thing. And it is, of course, really true. You surrender to Baba, Baba works out everything else that I don't think I had damage. It was a cop-out thing to say, but whatever damage there might have been, Baba steps in and works things out when you surrender to him.
He was very gentle about that with people. When they said, well, Baba, I found out about you by taking drugs. And he would also say, look, taking drugs may have led you to me, but after that, there's absolutely no need and it would be hurtful. And I just remind people, look, people go off to war and have terrible experiences, but they can come back much more mature and much broader vision of life and found elements of themselves, courage and priorities that other people would not have. But you wouldn't say to find God or to find meaning, you should go to war. Okay. So yes, of course, any kind of tragedy, any kind of mistake may be and always is a learning experience. And it takes you to a certain place. And if it takes you to Baba, then surrender and best efforts come in. Now, everybody knows, Meher Baba said this was not an easy path of spirituality following the avatar, that you're saving hundreds of lives just by being here, that all of your worst sanskaras may come out, which is a blessing because it would take thousands of lives for them to come out. And life is a struggle. But not only is it well worth it, but everybody, and he says he's come for the few, who loves him and thinks of him and surrenders to them will be helping others just by that fact, just by being around someone. And it can be brought to the least task ever. And Baba would say, you know, being a janitor is as valuable spiritually as being a minister or a government official. And that's a nice thing. So wherever we are now, whatever we've done has gotten us there. And we don't have to carry that baggage. As Baba said, the past is a frozen lake. For you young people, there's not much frozen yet. So there's lots of flexibility. And we have a lot of faith in this younger generation. And a very good chance that you are souls who have been with Mayor Baba in the past, in the near past. And that's been a great privilege too.
That was awesome, Ellen. Thank you so much for coming. I hope everyone who was at the Tween Sahavas, and I know from Effort and Grace who joined earlier, enjoyed this. Nashi, thank you so much for coming, as well as Tony. Just a quick feedback, Soham and the tweens here. Any things you guys want to say to Alan and Nashi? Go ahead.
Your stories were really interesting.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Yeah.
Thank you guys. And thank you for tuning in and being so patient and delving into this this unusual world in our society. But I trust you guys with it, and you know, you're carrying on knowledge that's very, very important. And thank you,
And I think it was a
Shilpa,
great interaction.
thank you for your brilliant hosting.
Oh, thank you.
And I could hardly believe that we pulled this off. And Nash, it is so delightful to see you.
Thank you so much. For me, it was a learning experience. I learned so much today.
You know so much already. Keep your head large. and say hello to Sean Connery for us.
Yes, that's right.
All right, well, J Bob, everyone.
Jai Baba, everyone.
See you
Thank
soon.
you so much. See you
Okay.
guys next week.
Bye bye.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Baba, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Jai Baba.
J Bob.
Thank you,
Thank you. Bye, J Baba.
Bye-bye, Jay Baba.
Bye bye. Jai Baba.